From living in Ethiopia during the Civil War to founding a company working at the highest level in sport and business, this episode's guest has quite an unpredictable story. I'm James Hewitt, and this is High Performance Talks, a show dedicated to finding inspirational ways to improve performance through better health and well-being. In each episode, you'll hear personal stories from high-performing individuals ranging from top executives and entrepreneurs to world champion athletes and scientists. Today, I'll be talking to Annastiina Hintsa. Annastiina is Chief Operating Officer at Hintsa Performance, and, as her name may suggest, she has a long-standing relationship with the company. In this episode, we discuss the origins of Hintsa Performance, from Ethiopia to the world of Formula One, and her part in this, including some great stories, anecdotes, and reflections on how life and work relates to our core. That's our sense of identity, purpose, and control. Thanks very much for joining us today, Stina.
My pleasure.
And I've been looking forward to this conversation, because I can ask you all the questions I've been thinking about, and we've got a permanent record. Not that I want to put you under any pressure at all.
Sure.
But obviously you carry the Hintsa name. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so great that you can be part of this podcast series. And one of the things I really wanted to hear from you was for you to tell the story about how this all emerged, because I know you only joined the company relatively recently, kind of in your most recent capacity. But actually, this has been a story that you've been part of all your life.
Yeah, all my life for sure. And it's a difficult question to say where it all actually began. But I think, when most people talk about Hintsa, they think of Formula One, right? But where it began for me was definitely in Africa, in Ethiopia, where my father worked as a missionary doctor, as you know. And yeah, I think it was actually his work with Haile Gebrselassie and some of the endurance athletes that kind of sparked the beginning of it.
And so, how old were you when you first went to Africa?
I was 3 years old.
And so, do you have some memories of that time?
No, absolutely. I was 13 when we moved back permanently. Wow. So it was Africa. Ethiopia for me was definitely home when I was growing up. It was sort of where I have my sweetest memories. My kind of like key childhood memories are all from there.
Mm. And what do you remember about that time? Like, what kind of people did you meet? Did you meet some of the people that Aki was working with?
Of course. I mean, his primary job was to work as a missionary doctor, as I said. We started off in Shebe, in the middle of nowhere, in the bushes is what we call it. And he was heading a clinic there. He was actually training surgeons during the Civil War time. So quite a... when I think about it now, it seems like a pretty... Actually, like a very risky decision to take. Take 3 blonde girls and then bring him in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of a civil war. It's or a guerrilla war. It's quite intense, actually. But as a child, what I remember is, playing around, climbing trees, building huts. My mother taught us at a home school. We had friends, we had monkeys, we had a leopard as a pup. So it was very, very, I don't know, I feel privileged and grateful for having a childhood like that.
And so when you were 13, you came back to Europe?
We came back to Finland when I was about 13. We lived in Finland for a couple of years in between as well. But permanently, when I was 13, came back to Finland. It was actually a bit of a shock, to be honest. At that age, it's quite a fragile age to come back to your roots, if you will. But yeah, that was... And since then, it's been Finland and all over.
Mm. So one of the things that's interested me when we've spoken before is that this kind of interest in helping people and working with people seems to be something that's been quite consistent through your life. Can you remember a time when that kind of interest in people and being involved in a kind of quite active way emerged? Is it something that you think, did you inherit it? Did you find it for yourself? Is it something that you became aware of or maybe only notice in hindsight?
I I think it's a combination of those things. But yeah, to a great extent, of course, it's something that I inherited from both my parents, both Aki and my mother Marketa. They took the decision to go to East Africa when I was very, very young, and it was something that I grew up with for sure. And when we came back to Finland, it was part of that shock was also a sense of lost meaning in life, if you will, because when you're somewhere where the fruits of your work are quite visible, and there is a reason for you to be there, it's very easy to justify, going through even harder times. When you come back to the West, where you're actually quite privileged, we belong to like that top 1 or 5% in the world, most of us, even those living in harder conditions, and it becomes actually a lot more difficult to find the meaning. But I think my father found it always in helping people, and I think one of the key learning from him that I got was that every single person, no matter what their background, no matter what their status, they might be world champions, or they might be, leading politicians, CEOs, businessmen. They might be, someone off the street in Ethiopia. Their value as a person is always the same. And helping that person off the streets in Ethiopia and helping that CEO or Formula One driver is exactly as valuable. And the impact you can actually have through some of these, high performers and leaders is actually substantial.
So when you came back to Europe and Aki was kind of working with a range of different clients, I think it sounds like he had about 10 different jobs. How involved were you with that work? How much contact did you have with it?
So when he came back to Europe, obviously that was around the same times as he started working with Mika, and the whole Formula One, emerged in his life. He was also working for the Olympic Committee. I was, my first memories are some of these Formula One drivers that you see even now winning world championships. They would come to our house, and we would have, my mother would make tea for them, and they would eat something which is like a Finnish pastry that I know some of them were actually very fond of. And we'd sit by the dinner table, and I would even have a clue who they are. I remember one of these drivers. My father asked him to take me to my ballet practice, and I was actually very opposed to this, as I noticed he was only 16, so he must not have a driver's license. And it was sort of stories like that. I had no idea it was Nico, and it was sort of it was definitely something that was very normal, and you realize that these are completely normal people. They're actually, a lot of them are very young. They're very determined, very hungry, and exceptional in so many ways as athletes, but at the same time they are just people, and they're living their, like, a lot of times these like young and fragile years when they actually need to make big decisions about their life. So that was something like the first sort of exposure to the work that my father was doing. The other kind of part from 2005 onwards, I was helping my father to run some of the training camps for McLaren, which was one of the kind of, it was actually very fascinating. For me, the most important part was actually to be able to work with my father. He of course he worked a lot, and that was a way for us to connect in a new way. And so we ran these like week-long camps for the whole racing team. So it was the mechanics, the engineers, the drivers, test drivers, everyone. We took them off to a small sports institute in Finland called Kuortane. I was responsible pretty much for the whole logistic, organizing, schedule, finding the speakers, booking the flights or planes, and it was a lot of fun.
It's interesting when you can reflect back on those moments in the kitchen when you were with these future superstars and you just saw them kind of eating the food that your mother made for them, drinking tea, and I think that it does speak to something that I still think is in the DNA of our company. One of the things I've always seen kind of in how you interact with people, also how Aki interacted with people, is that people are just people. Like you said, everyone's got value. He's treated people like human beings, and perhaps they're a world champion, perhaps they're a billionaire or a CEO or maybe just someone who's wandering along and he happens to bump into them. But I think that idea of valuing people for who they are, and trying to help them regardless of who they are and support them or just listen to them, is something that I've seen continue to be expressed now. But this approach of kind of being very human with people, I think it runs contrary to what people might think or see in the world of Formula One from the outside. The glamour, the private jets, the big watches, the huge sunglasses. But when you were working kind of on these early training camps, were you aware that Aki's approach, this Hintsa approach, was something unusual? Because my understanding is it was quite different. Not many people were doing that kind of thing at the time.
It was completely different, and it wasn't. Maybe for me personally, and having known my father for my entire life, it was not something I considered unusual. I thought that was the way you interact with people. That was the way you treat people, and that's sort of like, it's just natural to look at people that way. But when I sort of became aware of how exceptional and how different it was, yeah, for sure it was something. It was like he brought something very different to Formula One, both sort of like in the way that he treated and saw people, but also in terms of the holistic model, and in the kind of sort of seeing people as a whole, starting from the core. Those 3 questions. Do you know who you are? Do you know what you want? Are you in control of your life? And those 3 questions should and could be asked from anyone and everyone. And that was also part of his approach. And I like that we have actually gone back to it in the very recent years, not just serving drivers, but actually serving the entire team. And that was also something that I quickly became aware of, that was something new. So he actually saw Formula One from the beginning as a team sport. And the importance of the mechanics and the engineers in the paddock was actually equally important to him as the well-being and health and performance of the driver.
I mean, I'd like to come back to how that team approach now. We've ported that over and we're adopting it in with businesses as well. Not just looking at individuals and CEOs, but entire companies. But I want to stay kind of back with some of these origin stories for a while. And it sounds like you could have potentially made a career for yourself in motorsport, in Formula One. Perhaps you could have continued to run training camps, but you didn't. So what happened? Where did you end up kind of post university? What were you doing?
Post-university and already before university, I was actually working with women in entrepreneurship in South America for about 3 years. And that was sort of like the...
What kind of business was it that you were involved in?
All sorts. So I worked in coffee plantations. I helped a team of women set up an internet cafe. I helped them set up an ecotourism village. And it was basically what we did was we helped communities and groups of women create business plans. And then based on those business plans, they would be granted a loan. So it was basically a supported microfinance approach. And that was something I got exposed to already before university. And that was actually one of the kind of pivotal moments in my life when I realized this is what I wanted to study. Economics and business, as opposed to becoming a doctor, actually. That was my childhood dream forever. And even during my university years, I went back to that dream and thought about whether I should, reconsider everything. But no, it was actually those years in Costa Rica, Guatemala that shaped my studies.
Well, it sounds like you were doing a lot of traveling during that time. I imagine you were giving out a lot. One of the themes that I've talked about in a number of these podcasts with people is that I've spoken to a lot of people who are committed to giving a lot to other people, and it seems that often it's the people who are giving out a lot who forget to look after themselves. Did you manage to look after yourself during that time? How were you doing?
I'd say during my my sort of during the time in Central America, in Latin America, was definitely one of the happiest times in my life, and I was actually able to look after myself quite well. It was a very simple and balanced life, very, very simple. I literally lived without electricity, so a lot of times, and so it was extremely basic, and quite happy. The time when I struggled the most was actually after university. I briefly worked for the Bank of Finland, but then I join a consultancy. And that was, again, something I very much enjoyed. But that was a time when I definitely also struggled to look after myself, if you will.
What kind of things did you enjoy? What were the kind of fulfilling aspects of that role? I imagine it was quite exciting, quite a lot of things to achieve and accomplish.
Yeah, for sure. No, it was, I think you could summarize it in like a extremely steep learning curve. I've always been kind of curious. I've always wanted to learn and develop myself, and that as an environment is just optimal for it. It's the people you interact with, both your clients and your teammates, from the most junior to the most senior, and they're all really, really smart and exceptional people, and it's a privilege to learn from each and every one of them. The other kind of aspect in the learning curve is definitely the themes you work with. So the topics and the kind of challenges that you encounter are quite unique, especially at an early stage of your career. So I worked a lot in public sector and development again, and that was something that I very much enjoyed. It was topics from, say, we want to introduce or support entrepreneurship in a developing country, or reshape the taxation regime, or education, or it was really, really cool topics.
And so what kind of challenges came with that? Because, we've talked a bit before about kind of, some of I remember you talking about the nutritional content of minibars, which you seem to be quite strangely aware of.
Basically, the kind of funny part about management consultants is that they often work in 2 shifts, but they do both of those shifts every day, 5 days a week. Weekends you typically rest, but 5 days a week it's 2 shifts in a row. You start, 9 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. You go to the client office, you finish at 5. Then you come back to your own office after 5, and you start your night shift. And that might end whenever. And it's sort of a combined that with travel. I was traveling quite a bit for my work as well. So could be, at the time you're referring to, I was traveling 3 different continents on a client project. If you want to be blunt, I was not living according to any Hintsa principles at all. Very, very much looking to, forgetting to look after myself, or feeling capable of looking after myself. I wanted to, but it was very difficult. It was, you don't really find time to exercise. You often, quote unquote, forget to eat. So when you get to the hotel room, yes, I did try to eat healthy. So I scanned the minibar for, the healthiest or best nutritional value, which is, by the way, Snickers bars, because of the peanuts, obviously.
We'll claim our royalties for that sponsorship later.
Yeah. And it was, it was not a healthy lifestyle by any means.
I mean, was there a particular moment that woke you up to that? Because this is not the life you're living now.
No, absolutely not. It was actually a very specific moment. It was one November morning, actually, here in Helsinki, when I was running downstairs to catch my taxi. And in Helsinki, in my apartment, we have these like stone staircases. And suddenly I passed out. I fell down, rolled down the stone staircase, and woke up at the bottom of it. And my head was bleeding. And it was that moment. My first thought was, where's my laptop? Which is quite sad. I realized I needed help. And from that moment on, it was a bit of a forced stop.
Mm. I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you're obviously a resilient person. Spent the early years of your life living in Ethiopia, travelled to some very interesting parts of the world, doing some very demanding projects. And it's surprising how many times you hear from people that it sometimes requires this kind of quite brutal moment for us to come to a realisation that something needs to change.
Yeah, I think it is exactly as you said. When you are quite resilient, you are used to being able to kind of push through things and you keep on piling new things on top of your old responsibilities, and you have this false, self-perception of being able to do everything and anything. I can do it. I know, if I looked at anybody else, I would be horrified for the lifestyle they were living, and I would be actually trying to shield my team quite a bit, even when working as a consultant. But that came at the expense of myself, and that is it is a false perception, because at some point every one of us, we will reach our limit. And if you're a very resilient person, this is just a hypothesis, perhaps your limit, reaching that limit, is a bit more abrupt than for others.
Something stops you rather than you stopping the train.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, but it was a good wake up call. It was I think two things. I obviously bounced back, and I think two things contributed to that. It was, number one, I called my father, and I wasn't aware of using any Hintsa methodologies or philosophies at the time. We just had a chat, or a number of chats, and he went through my medical records and everything. But that was just me talking with my father, and that actually helped a lot. The other thing was that my office supported me tremendously. It was extremely important. It was like it was extremely important.
So what kind of changes did you make? How did you bounce back? Did you live a different way after that?
I think the key actually, it started from the core. My father did ask me those like three key questions of like, which basically for me boiled down to what are the things I actually value in life? Who are the people I actually value in life? Am I living my life according to those values? Obvious answer is not. I was literally, not looking after myself. I was not seeing my family. I saw my boyfriend at the time mostly when he was asleep, and that's no joke. It was really not living in accordance to those values that I perceived as important. The other thing that was really a key turning or key question for me was that question of control. So, are you in control of your life? And obviously at that point you feel like you've lost it. And what my father challenged me to think about was, what are the things in your life that you can actually control? And maybe flipping that around. What are the things you actually can't control? And once you start going through, you realize that there are a lot more things that you actually can impact than you might think. And it's not just even yourself. It's the things around you. It's your environment. It's the people around you who you actually can impact. And that was for me one of the things. So a very concrete example. I used to think that, client demands something and I need to deliver by tomorrow. Is it really so? A lot of times the client expectation is also definitely not for tomorrow, but maybe by the end of the week. It's it was sort of very obvious things in a way, but I think the biggest change happened inside my head.
So after you had this wake up moment where you rolled down the stairs, you started to make some changes. It's great that you got that support from your office as well, but I understand that you started to pay a bit more attention, invest a bit more time in yourself in terms of physical activity and training as well. What did that involve?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, fast forward about 9 months from my crash or burnout. I'm running in the desert with about 12 kilos on my back and 250 kilometers to go. So I did start training and looking after myself a bit more. Running is something I picked up actually in South America when I noticed that there is no way walking around without stopping all the time to talk with people, and I'm a Finnish person, so I need some time alone. So I started running. It's much easier to go like "Hola, ciao," if you just run past people. Anyway, picked it up years back, and I really love running. At the time of my burnout, I was barely able to walk up the stairs without getting exhausted. I was literally not in very good shape. So one of the things that I did change, in addition to obviously my mindset, was, or a couple of things I changed. One of them was my sleep. I made a conscious effort to sleep a bit more. That helped me to be able to actually exercise a bit more. And obviously looking after my nutrition. Super, super basic, simple things, right? Things that we should all know, or things where we probably all do know, and things that we should all do. But somehow things that I had completely omitted for years. And so I started training, and I'm the type of person who needs a goal. So I started searching for marathons, and I just didn't really feel like it. So I found this ultra marathons. It's called a race series called the Four Deserts, and it really hit me. I really got excited about it, and training for it while working was obviously again quite a challenge, but I managed, and it was also one of those forcing mechanisms for me. Once you have a goal like that, you have to take care of yourself. You have to find time for training. You have to, go to bed at reasonable time. Otherwise, you're kind of going to miss it up all, and you're not going to survive out at the desert. So for me, it was I still do it. It still is my sort of coping mechanism.
It's interesting when you talked about kind of almost using ultra running as this kind of hack to almost force you to do the right things. And as you know, one of my interests is in how can we actually change behaviour? What is it that really gets people to change? And it seems like willpower actually isn't very effective. And just saying I will go to bed early doesn't seem to work. But if you can fix it to this higher goal, something that you really care about, and potentially also with the fear of collapsing between two sand dunes and not being able to get out, I can imagine that gives you the little kick you need to eat a little bit better and go to bed a little bit earlier.
Very effective, I would have to say. Very effective.
And so, today, how well are you doing in terms of looking after yourself now? Because, fortunately, one of our sayings at Hintsa is no one needs to be perfect. You can only be a little bit better. But you're helping to lead a rapidly growing company. I think we're both aware of some of the challenges of that, as many of the listeners will be as well, in terms of their own demanding roles. How do you balance well-being, performance, trying to help other people grow a company, run ultra marathons in your spare time?
You make it sound like it's a lot. I actually don't know if I feel quite the same. Honestly, if you ask some of the coaches, they would tell you the truth and be like, "Oh no, there is still a lot room for improvement." Personally, I like to look at the trajectory. So if I compare the life that I'm living to the life that I was living, say, 5-6 years ago, it's quite different. I do feel a lot more in control. I do feel a lot more balanced in many ways. I'm sleeping about 3 hours more than I used to, which is significant. And I would say that the trajectory is definitely very positive, even though there is obviously room to improve. Another saying that I like that we use is 80-20. Don't even like expect, be kind to yourself. Don't even expect yourself to be able to perform perfect at all times, because that's not sustainable.
I think it's a really important message, and it reminds me of a kind of reflection that I heard recently, and they were suggesting that so often we can end each day or even each week feeling like we've not accomplished anything. The to-do list always remains enormous, and many things on the to-do list inevitably remain undone. And it can lead us sometimes to feel like we're not really achieving, we're not really changing. But this reflection encouraged us to think about what has happened in the last 5 years. And they actually said, what would you 5 years ago say about what was happening now, what you're achieving, how you're living? I think it's a very healthy way to reflect, because when we look in the micro, we don't really see change. There's so many fluctuations. This week may be better or worse than last week. Who knows?
This day might be better or worse than yesterday, or even today, in the morning you might be feeling not quite as energetic as you feel in the afternoon. It's all sort of changing constantly. And I think it is definitely that. It does. One of the things that I think we do bring to people, in particular the ones that have been high performing all their lives, and they have these amazing careers, and they've worked really hard to get where they are. And one of the things that I think we do bring to them is that moment of reflection, is that, asking those questions and having them sort of stop and think about whether, stop and think.
So, as we start to come into land, if you were to leave the listeners with one reflection, a thought to maybe take a step back and ponder on, what would it be?
I'm actually going to have to go back to something that we just talked about, and something that you said, which is that thought of, nobody's perfect, but every one of us can be a little better every day, one day at a time. It's something that my father often said, and I particularly like it because what it does is it gets you thinking about those kind of small steps and little actions, decisions, active decisions you make every day. It's every one of us does them, consciously or unconsciously. And it really is, in the end, it is an accumulation of those small decisions. Wherever that, trajectory is taking us, it is an accumulation of those small everyday decisions that we make. So yeah, none of us is perfect, but we can all be a little better one day at a time.
That's a great place to end. So thank you very much for your time, Stina. You've been listening to High Performance Talks, brought to you by Hintsa Performance, the leading provider of human high performance coaching and digital wellbeing services. Thanks to today's guest, Annastiina Hintsa. You can find all the episodes of High Performance Talks in Hintsa's newsroom at hintsa.com/newsroom. That's HINTSA.com/newsroom. The full version of this interview is also available through our Better Life coaching service. The host of the show is me, James Hewitt. Our producer is Nora Jonefelt. If you liked what you heard, please rate us and share this episode with your friends. Thank you.